Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today's session, we're going to take a look at the Form 471, and we'll do a step-by-step with a couple of different examples. One for Category 1, with using the example of a leased fiber purchase or lease, I guess, agreement, leased lit fiber, and then we'll take a look at a Category 2 example, presuming that you would be making a purchase from a CATS contract. So we'll talk about how to relate your Form 471 Category 2s to the state contracts. That it's a very common set of purchases, so we're going to use those as our examples for the day. We may or may not touch upon anything that is directly related to what what you might be filing for, but if that's the case, certainly let us know. We'd be more than happy to do any kind of walkthroughs with you outside of this training session, where we can address the individual questions that you have regarding perhaps some of the more detailed or convoluted kinds of things that can occur, and we'll talk about a couple of those places of where those things occur within the system. So we'll point those out, and then we can talk about those further if you have any questions. As a matter of housekeeping, please feel free to jump in, ask a question. You can use the chat. You can just unmute your mic and speak up. It's okay with us. We do really want to make sure that these conversations are, excuse me, directly addressing your questions. So the more interactive we can make this, the better. So without further ado, I think I'm going to just dive right in. We will be posting a recording of this or one of our sessions from the past week or so on the KDE Media portal, and it will be linked in the E-Rate District collection site, the same place that you uploaded your discount data. There are resources and links there as well. And we'll be sending that out via the KEs, hopefully later today. If not today, then certainly early tomorrow. So without further ado, I'm going to just jump right into sharing my screen, and we'll take a look at. Hopefully you can see it. Somebody give me a thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to dive right into the Form 471. You start a Form 471 using the links in the upper right. All of these are different forms or different requests. We'll start by clicking the Form 471, and the first thing it's going to do is going to ask you for a nickname for this particular application. And I recommend that you use a name that is going to help you remember what this particular application was for. So in that kind of case, we might do something like a WAN 2025, whatever works best for you. That is a required field, so you'll have to put something in there. And you save and continue, brings you to ask about contacts. I think in most cases you are going to be the contact person. You note that it drops your information into the application. If not, if you want it to be somebody else, you need to make sure that they are an Epic user. So you might need to add them as a user before you can search for them if you say no in this spot. For the holiday and summer contact information, this is where you might indicate that, for example, you might know that you're going to be out for the month of July. So you might say out July 2025. The importance with respect to this, although it's not a required field, it can be important because if a reviewer were to reach out to you while you're out and then not hear back from you because you're still out, they may end up denying the application. And so if you have indicated here that you know you're going to be out during that period of time, you would have grounds for a successful appeal that would hopefully not take very long. We'll save and continue, and we move on to selecting our category of service. We're going to start with Category 1. So that's going to be our selection right now. Be aware that once you select these and then click Save and Continue, that once you're on to the next page, you cannot come back and change this. So make sure that you get this right up front. Otherwise, you need to probably just discard the form and start over. A quick note with respect to the off-premises category 1, if you are considering bus Wi-Fi or hotspots for loaners, let's have a little bit of a conversation. There is some talk on the national scene with respect to both of those as eligible services and the possibility that they may not be eligible services in the future. So while they do appear to be actively eligible services for 2025. That may not be the case for 2026. So be leery of entering into any kinds of long-term commitments or contracts with respect to those services. And if you do, you would probably be well served in adding a clause in that contract that makes it contingent upon E-rate funds or for that matter, even E-rate eligibility for those services. That way, if they were to go away, you would not be on the hook for a year or more of those services at full cost to the district. So we've selected category 1 for this example. We'll save and continue. The next 3 pages are really just a review for you to look through the data about your school district and about your buildings and make sure that this data is correct. It's pulled from the building profiles, and this should be reflective of the discount data that you entered probably last month or back in December. If it is not, we'll talk about how to correct that as we move along. But if you do see that it does not match, then be aware that you will need to take steps to make sure that that all matches up. We can show our entities here. Shows you whether CEP is being used, and then your total number of NSLP eligible and total number of students enrolled. Again, quick double check and you should be good to go. Save and continue, and now we get to the point where we start to build out a funding request. We'll start by sort of building the scaffolding of the funding request. When I say scaffolding, I really mean that we're just kind of putting in the big high-level details about a funding request. So again, it's going to ask us for a nickname, and again, it might be something as simple as what it's for and the year that it applies to. And then it asks you whether this funding request is a continuation of an FRN from a previous year. As I've said in previous sessions, 99.44, if not more % of the time, you're going to be saying no here. It's worth pointing out that if you had a WAN application last year and you're under the same contract this year, those are 2 separate years, and so the answer here is no for that. You're not actually continuing an older FRN. You're creating a new FRN for a new funding year. So you're going to be saying no there the vast majority of the time. If you're not sure, feel free to reach out to me, Caprice, Courtney. We'll all be able to help you through that, but generally speaking, the answer is going to be no there. This copy FRN function is actually really quite useful with respect to WAN applications. It is not uncommon that a WAN, it does not have any changes to it from one year to the next. No changes in pricing, that's all contract set. No changes in speeds. You can then, in those kinds of circumstances, use this copy FRN function. Click on it and it opens a search where you would place the number of the Form 471, perhaps from last year's 471, or you could search by FRN number. If you know what the FRN is, you've got a copy of your 471 from last year, you can just type in the FRN number that you want. You'd type it in and then you would click search. Now, this being the Epic Sandbox that allows for demonstrations, but is not live, we don't actually have the ability to take this all the way to searching for and adding an FRN. But you would type in the FRN number, search the list, you type in the 471 number or the FRN. It will build a list of items that match your search. You would select the FRN from that list, and then you would click copy. It takes about 10, 15 seconds, maybe a little bit more. It's not one of those ones where you have to stop and go get a cup of coffee or come back and then come back. Although if you want to, of course you could, but it will then bring in all of the FRN data from that previous year's funding request, which is really handy because now you don't have to go through and enter all of that by hand. You would be able to just go through and double check that the data is in fact correct. I do encourage you to, even if you use that copy function, you really should do your due diligence to make sure that that has copied over correctly. Last but not least on this page, service type, you only have one option because this is category 1 and there is only one service type for category 1. It's data transmission or internet access. So we'll be on continue. We have an FRN contract. The contract, yes, in this case, we're going to use the example of a contract. And we're actually going to discuss how to enter a contract. If you are entering into a new contract for your WAN services, one of the things that you will have to do is to enter the contract into your into the EPIC system before you can associate it to this funding request. So how do we do that? Pretty simple. Excuse me. You know what? Oh, there we go. There we go. I'm going to grab this and put this elsewhere. Okay. So from your landing page, you can actually just use the tab that you left when you started your Form 471. You can go back to that tab, and it takes you back to your landing page. And from here, in order to enter a new contract, you're going to click on your school district name on next to the welcome text underneath the logo. And it takes you to a summary page of the information about the district. You can see across the top there are a number of different tabs for additional information, discount rate, category 2, and then there's contracts. And of course, there's more there as well. But you click on contracts, and now it's going to show you a list of all of the contracts that you have entered into the EPIC portal. You'll note that it only shows the first 20. You might have to, if you wanted to view any of these to see how you've done it in the past, you might need to do some toggling if you've got more than 20. It's probably not one that you've got more than 20 of yet. But in order to enter a new one, you do have to click Manage Contracts up in the right-hand corner. So we'll click on that, scroll down to the bottom, and click Add a New Contract. And again, it's going to ask you for a nickname. This time, it's going to be a nickname for the contract. And here I suggest not only saying what is it for, but perhaps even including the service provider name and then the years. And I say years specifically because there might be more than a one-year contract, and those years being valid, it might be helpful as well. So anything that really is going to help you remember what the contract is, who it's with, and perhaps the time period that it runs through would be useful to include in the nickname. For the contract number, you note that there is no asterisk. It is not a required field. If there is a contract number that has been assigned by either the district or by the service provider, you can certainly enter that there. That should help folks cross-reference things if they have any questions about and need to review your contract, which if you are entering this as its first year, you can almost assuredly count on somebody asking questions about the contract. It's just a standard operating procedure. Okay, so the next page you see that a contract ID has been assigned by the EPIC system, and then it asks if you would like to upload a copy. I do recommend that you go ahead and upload a copy. It's just a drag and drop like you've seen other places within EPIC. Very simple process, quick description, and just a copy of the contract. It doesn't take a great deal of detail there. But I do recommend that you upload the copy because it will save a step in the review process. If you say no here, they're just going to come and ask you for the copy of the contract. So you can kind of save the headache of having to hear from USAC. If you're anything like me, anytime, Epic Administrator shows up in your inbox, you go, uh-oh, now what? I have that reaction on a regular basis, but unfortunately, most of the time it's not critical, but it is kind of distracting, and it adds another layer of interaction that isn't necessarily anything. It's something that you could have avoided if you had said yes. Now, right now, I'm just going to say no so that we can go and move on quickly, but that is recommended. Is this contract based on a state master contract? No, we're talking about a contract here that's between you and your service provider for WAN services. So that is not going to be based on a state master contract. And in all likelihood, it's not going to be based on a multiple award schedule. You're not actually awarding multiple contracts to multiple providers. You're actually just doing with a single service provider. So it's not a multiple award contract. It is not going to be something that, generally speaking, you're going to be making available for others. So you probably didn't, and you would say no there in terms of piggybacking. Can others? And then, are you piggybacking on a contract that has already been created? And in this case, you're also going to be saying no. You are starting fresh with a contract that you entered into to establish it in the first place. So we'll say no on both of those and save and continue. Now it's going to ask you about the Form 470. Did you post a Form 470 for the products and services that are going to fall under this contract? You need to be able to be saying yes here to that, unless you're dealing with one of the very, very rare exemptions for Category 1 services. If you have the low-cost, high-speed exemption, that's the only instance where you would say no with this. But for yours, you're going to be saying yes. Was your form posted prior to 2016? Probably not. Hopefully you've established new contracts over that period of time, because I'm sure that there would be cost savings to be realized. Then it's going to ask you how many bids you received. Let's say you received 4. So you would that number is going to reflect the number of bids that you actually received. If you had any that were disqualified for whatever reason, you do include that in the number, so that because it's a questioning how many you received rather than how many you actually ended up evaluating. And then it's going to ask you to associate that Form 470 with this contract. So conveniently, they automatically include your build entity number for the district in this search string. All you have to do is click search, and it's going to bring up a list of all of your contracts. Or excuse me, all of your Forms 470. And be careful how I parse that. Yes, brings up a list of all of the Forms 470 that you have established. From this list, you'll select the one that you want to associate to this contract, and then you're going to click Save and Continue. Note that it only does 5 at a time, so you may need to do some toggling to find the correct Form 470. Click Save and Continue, and now it's going to ask for an account number. Notice that, again, this is not a required field, but you can, if you feel so inclined, you can enter the district phone number, the main district phone number, if you feel so inclined, but you can also leave it blank. And then here you can search by service providers, either by SPIN. So if you happen to know the SPIN off the top of your head, you can just type that in and click search. Or if you are not exactly sure what the SPIN is and you need to locate it, you can use a search string on the name. You click search. The name of the service provider comes up. Just note that, as you can see here, there are multiples that matched my search string. So if you do it this way, you do need to make sure that you are carefully selecting the correct one. The easiest way to make sure that you've done that is to actually do it by the searching by SPIN, so that you only get the one result that matches your provider. So we'll select our service provider. We've selected the correct SPIN, and we're going to save and continue. Is this a multi-year contract? Well, that's a very common thing with WAN contracts, so we'll say yes on that as part of our example. And then what is the date that you awarded the contract? This date will have to be some date that exists between the the end of the 28-day waiting period when you presumably started your your review of the bids that you've received, and today's date when you're filing the Form 470. So it needs to go in there somewhere in between. Perhaps it was last Thursday that you started that process, and that was a few days after you had finished your Form 470 28-day waiting period, and any deadline that you had set on your Form 470 had come and gone. So we'll select that as our date, and we'll save and continue. Does it include voluntary extensions? That is also very common, so we'll use that as part of our example here. What is the contract expiration date if all extensions are exercised? Well, in this example, let's just say that the contract that you've struck has an initial term of 2 years with 3 one-year extensions, which means that the full term of the contract is a 5-year contract. So here we would just simply enter 6/30/2030. And then how many extensions are remaining on the contract? In this case, we're entering into it brand new. So you would say 3 there. And then the total remaining length of contract, if you exercised all of the extensions, that would, excuse me, just a moment. Pardon me. The total remaining length of the contract, if you exercised all of the extensions, if my math doesn't fail me, that would be 60 in this particular example. So we've entered that, and we move on to save and continue. On the next page, it's going to ask you about pricing confidentiality. I generally encourage folks to say no here unless there is some strict rule that your service provider has. There's nothing in terms of state statutes or rules that restrict you from doing so. I will say that if you do say yes here, you should expect to be asked about that. They will ask you probably for the statute or some other clause in the contract, something from your service provider that shows that there is grounds for keeping that information private. So this last page then, quick review, make sure that the data that we entered is in fact accurate. 3 remaining 60 months, if all extensions, multi-year, yep, all of our information is correct. If you had uploaded a copy of your contract, it would be listed here as a supporting document. And we're ready to complete that contract. Now, you'll notice that it drops in right at the very top, and we know then we have entered that contract. And we can just use our tabs on our browser to go back to our Form 471. Now, please note that if you get to this point and you have already clicked search, and in the list you didn't see the contract that you just entered, whatever you do not use a page refresh. That will actually cause Epic to go back to the beginning of creating your funding request. Basically just starts the whole process over. So don't do that. What you want to do is clear your filters and then re-enter your Ben and then click search. And that way then you should be able to see the contract in the list that comes up. Note also that these headings are sortable. So if you click them, you can change them to ascending or descending order based upon that particular column. This is the one that we just entered. That's the one that we want to associate to this particular funding request. Notice that once I clicked on that and scroll down, the information from that contract gets pulled into this 471. And it establishes automatically for you a July 1st start date, which is fine. That's typical. The date that the contract expires for the current term of the contract. That's the key term there. The key words there is the current term. So if our example is that we have a 2-year contract with 3 extensions, 2 years from now would be 6, whoops, I have to have a 06/30/2027. if you are entering into one of your extension years, the end of that specific extension is going to be the end of the current term of the contract. So if we were entering into a 1-year extension year, this would be 26 rather than 27. But based on the example we were talking about, that would be 27. Now, that also having been said, make sure that you have some form of documentation to show that both you and the service provider have agreed to exercise an extension. Generally, some sort of addendum or just simply a support document. It could be just something on school letterhead that says, as of such and such a date, we agreed that we're going to extend, and then both parties sign off on it. Make sure you have that in hand prior to certifying your Form 471. Doesn't mean you can't go and finish the 470, but you can't certify it. Well, I suppose you can. I should be careful how they say it. It's possible to certify it without having that in hand, but they would expect that the date that would be listed on your documentation for that particular extension would occur prior to the date that you are filing your Form 471, the date on which you certified. So don't get yourself in any trouble there. Just make sure that you have some form of extension agreement written up prior to certifying this Form 471. We'll continue. Now it's going to ask you for key information about this particular request, and this is specifically about fiber. Are they asking, are you going to be requesting special construction, maintenance and operations, or network equipment on this particular form, this particular FRN? If no. If all you are asking for is the monthly service charge being supported by E-Rate, then you would say no here. If, however, you are picking up a piece of network equipment, for example, you might be looking at a core router, or you might be looking for maintenance and operations cost for a dark fiber solution. If those are the case, you're going to have to say yes here, and then you'll notice that it starts taking us down a rabbit hole that can get very convoluted very quickly. We could literally spend hours going down each one of those. I'm not going to do that right now, when this is kind of where I gave the little preview at the beginning. This is one of those places where I'm not going to dive into the details, but if you need to get into these details, we'll be more than happy to work with you one-on-one and walk you through the various selections that you have to make as you go through this. Be aware that if you are going to request any of these kinds of services or equipment, that you do need to create a separate FRN. You can do it on the same 471, but you'll need a separate funding request to cover the monthly costs that would be associated with lit or dark fiber. So we're going to say no here for now, because we're going to just use the example of monthly charges, and then we're going to continue. And we get to the narrative, and this is just when connection between buildings. My typing is really good. A very brief description is all really that's necessary here to just make sure that any reviewer is going to understand what it is that you are asking for in terms of the services listed on this Form 471. And then this place, the narrative is also where you would request that your discount data be updated. If you were unable to get the discount data updated in Epic prior to the close of the admin window, this is where you're going to list out each building and list their building, the building name, the BEN for the building, and also the new data that's applicable. You just include that right here. That way, hopefully, it would be hard to miss. So hopefully that your reviewer is going to see that. I'm sure that they are. I am certain that they are trained to look for that here in the narrative, so it shouldn't be too difficult for them to identify. So once you've got that information in here, simply click on Save and Add Managed FRN Line Items. If you have done the copy, your line items will already be here. And in order to review them, you would click on the line item number, which would actually be, in that case, a link, and it will take you into the details of that line item. That will allow you to review the line item details and or if you also want to, you can also edit those line items as well. You would check the checkbox and then click a button which will appear later when we've added one that says edit. But we're going to start by adding one fresh by hand from the beginning. A couple of things that I do want to mention with respect to how you organize your FRN line items. Generally, with the WAN example that we're giving here, it's common to have a collection, perhaps, of schools that have the same line speed and the same cost associated with them, so that those schools can go on the same funding request line item. There are, however, exceptions to that, where, let's just use the example of a district that has 4 schools. You have 2 elementaries, a middle and a high school. One of the elementaries and the middle and the high school all have a 10 gig connection, and it all costs the same amount on a monthly basis, like $2,000 on a monthly basis for each circuit. You can group those together on the same line item, but that fourth element, that fourth school, that second elementary school, has a pre-K population, and that pre-K population needs to be factored out. In other words, you need to do a cost allocation to account for ineligible users in that facility. That means that in order to make sure that your cost allocation doesn't get applied to every building and it only gets applied to that building where those kids are, that needs to go on its own separate line item. So we'll use that as our basis for answering some of these questions as we go through and doing our demonstration. The question here starts with what is the purpose for this particular line item? We're talking about a data connection between 2 or more sites entirely within your network. Basically, we're talking about WAN services. It's going to ask you for function, not to be confused, or maybe it is being confused with the medium, but essentially they're asking, what medium is delivering the services here. I think everybody's going to be saying fiber there. And then it's going to ask for the type of connection: DSs, OCs, dark fiber, switch multi-megabit, Ethernet, MPLS, et cetera, et cetera. If you do not know which of these applies to your services, check with your service provider. I'm going to select Ethernet because that is very, very common, and then we'll save and continue. It's going to ask you for download and upload speeds. Download speed, what we said, 10 gig is our example. Note that as soon as I selected those got automatically entered to the upload speeds because that's full duplex. If you had selected something that wasn't full duplex, where it allows for different upload and download speeds, you would have to enter those both manually rather than it being entered for you. And then the question over here on the right, asking whether this is burstable bandwidth. Basically, they're asking about if you were about to bump your head on those 10 gigs, would the connection be able to accommodate that for a very short period of time to avoid any bottlenecks? If you don't know the answer to this, again, I'm going to refer you back to your service provider, who should be able to tell you whether or not what you are receiving is burstable. And we'll save and continue. Some more questions about this service. Is this a direct connection to a school, library, or NIF for internet access? These are the key words: for internet access. It's not for internet access. You are doing this for data transmission only. Your internet access is provided through your CAN connection. So you're going to say no here. And then it asks, is this connection between schools and libraries that creates a wide area network? Yes, that is exactly what we are doing. So we'll say yes here. Does it include firewall services? Generally, I think you're probably not having a firewall in between your buildings, but if you do, you would say yes. If not, you'd say no. If you do say, if you do not know, check with your service provider. They should be able to tell you. And then we're now off to the money. And I made the example here. I said $2,000 per line. Here, our first set of 3 of the buildings in our four school district, we're going to say there's no ineligible to be pulled from that, and we have 3 lines that are at that cost and that speed. We click outside of one of the text fields, and the computation gets done for you. And then over here on the right-hand side, you do need to enter zeros in the text fields in order to move on and save and continue. If you hit save and continue beforehand, it would stay on this page, and it will put a little red line around the one that you missed, reminding you that it has to be filled in before you can go on. Then after our save and continue, we're going to identify the entities that are receiving services under this particular line item. So you might be saying no there and then selecting the buildings that it applies to. Now, granted, I know that my example in saying 4 schools, we've got 3 schools in this particular line item. Don't let that throw you, don't let that throw you. This is just for demonstration purposes, where you would select the ones that are receiving circuits under this particular line item. You would click add. Those get added to the list below as selected entities, and then you save and continue. The next page, basically, it's one of those, are you sure? And if you realize that you made a mistake, just use your back button and you can edit those. Otherwise, you look at that and you go, yep, those are the ones I selected and those are correct. And we're ready to save and continue, which will take us back to our line items. Note that here now we can talk, or we can we can look at this line item by clicking on the number, and then you can see then that it takes us back through. I am going to have to, now that I've done this, you can look at each and every one of these and make changes to it here, and save and continue. But that's how you get into a line item. You just click on the name. Oops, I went one too far. All right, so if I need to get into the details of an FRN, I can do the same thing and click on the link of the FRN, and it takes me to all of the line items associated with it. We're going to add one more, and we'll use our example of the elementary school that has a preschool population. So I'm going to blow through these really quickly. Save and continue. Bandwidth speed was at 10 gigs. Gets automatically entered. We're going to say no, no, yes, no. And we get here, and here's where we need to be. We did say it's the same line speed, same cost, it's $2,000, but there is a pre-K population at this location. So we have to do a cost allocation to account for them. How you go about a cost allocation and determining how much to allocate is up to you. The only guidance that USAC and FCC provide on this is that an allocation must be made. They also will give you the general guidance to say that whatever you use as your criteria for establishing that allocation is up to you, but it must be based on something tangible, and it will lead you to a reasonable result. So my couple of examples in this is something as simple as the total number of pre-K kids versus the total enrollment at that location. You figure out that percentage, and you can use that percentage. You could also base it upon other criteria, such as perhaps the number of pre-K classrooms in that building, or the number of drops in the pre-K classrooms in that building. That's if you got one of those fancy schmancy network dashboards that shows you the network traffic that's associated with those pre-K building or rooms, or the pre-K students as a group, you could use that as your ability, as your means of establishing your cost allocation. But whatever you do, treat this much like a high school math problem where you need to make sure that you show your work. So have some sort of tangible criteria, whether it's your enrollment or whatever. Have a piece of documentation that shows that as your starting point, and then show your calculations, how you came up with the number from there that you're ultimately going to enter here. Now, I'm just going to use the simple example of, let's say that there are 500 kids at this school and 50 of them are pre-K. Even my poor math skills tell me that that's 10%, and 10% of 2,000 is 200. So our 10% cost allocation gets factored out from the one school that has this on a monthly quantity. We only have one that under these circumstances, and then the calculations get automatically created for you. Then again, on the other side of the ledger, on the one times, none of those are one-time cost. We save and continue, and then we'll select the one location that this applies to, and then save and continue again. Yes, I'm sure that that's the one I want, and I'm back to my line items. So that is a very quick overview of adding line items for your WAN services, or adding an FRN for your WAN services. You save and continue, it will take you back to the FRN, and then it will take you on to reviewing the Form 471 if that's where you're ready, that's what you're ready to do at this point in time. I am going to just go ahead and discard this form. We'll talk about the certification process after we look at Category 2 example. In the meantime, while I'm playing around here, do we have any questions so far?
Sounds like you're doing a good job. No questions so far.
So far, okay. Then we'll move on to a quick example of Category 2. And for some of these things, these are repetitive, so I'm going to blow through them really, really quickly. But yeah, so like nickname. Yes. We're going to go Category 2. Save. Here's our 3 pages to review. Note that this is a separate Form 471. So you will need to, if you are going to need an update of your discount data for this form for this year, you need to make sure that you include that information in each of your Forms 471 and each of your narratives. Do not figure or count on that information being transferred from one 471 to another. They are likely to be viewed and reviewed by separate reviewers from USAC. So there's not a lot of cross-pollination in terms of that information. So don't expect it. Go ahead and anticipate that you will need to do that yourself. And add that to each of your Forms 471. So we're going to add an FRN here. Again, nickname might be equipment 2025. It's probably not going to be a continuation. You probably will not use the copy function on this time because you won't have FRNs that are exactly the same. These kinds of things tend to be different year to year. We are talking about an example here of, for example, an example of internal connections. The things that are on the CATS contracts all fall under that internal connections selection. If you have your own projects that you're doing, please be very, very careful in making sure that you are selecting the proper type of service. If you have a service type mismatch between your Form 470 and your Form 471, that can present difficult problems problems that are difficult to rectify, and you could end up tragically being on the hook for the full amount associated with your funding request because the funding request is ultimately denied. We will continue. Yes, it is from a contract, and here's where things get a little bit different than associating the contract to your organization. Instead, you're going to come in here and type in 128821. That is the number of the state consortium, and that's where the state's instances for these contracts are available. I will mention that the contract matrix has been released to the wild. It was sent to KEs, who I believe have also sent that out to you, but if you are still in need of a copy, the district collection site at the bottom, on the bottom right, you'll notice that we've got trainings and additional resources here as well, and you can see that the CETS contract matrix is posted there as well. So if you need a copy of the contract matrix, you can grab it from the district collection site. We'll come back to our Form 471. That number, this 128821 that you might have been getting ready to write down on a Post-it note, is also listed on the contract matrix, so you don't need to worry about losing that Post-it. You would click search. Now, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this because we're in that sandbox, but you would click search after entering 128821. You'll get a list of about, well, I think you'll probably be able to view like 5 or 10 of them. And actually we can see, yeah, it'll only show 5 of them at a time. You again can use your headers, your column headers, to do some sorting, and then you can also use your forward and backward buttons to toggle in between to find the correct contract. Make sure that when you associate the contract, that you're matching the contract ID number that USAC assigns to the contract ID number that is listed on the contract matrix. That's going to make sure that you cross-reference the correct one. Oh, that's not category 2. That's why that is. So I'm going to go find one that is for category 2. There we go. So we'll find that. Again, once you check it, the details of that contract get pulled in. Just double check and make sure that that's correct, particularly that your service provider is the one that you're looking for. And then the date of the expiration for that contract, also, again, listed on the contract matrix. But in this case, all of the CETS contracts we do know are expiring 6/30/27. That is the expiration for the current term of the contract. And then we'll continue. Narrative, maybe this is WAPS for elementary building. Again, this is where you'll place the information if you need to have your discount data updated. Save and manage FRN line items. We're going to add a new one. I should say, let me back up here and say yes. If you have a large order that includes many bits and pieces, parts, and whatnot, talk to your service provider. They may be able to help you fill out this bulk upload tool. You can download a copy of the template from here. You just click and it downloads automatically. You take a look at it when it opens up, if it opens up. And let me move this over so you can see it. There. So if you can, if they're willing to help you with it, they will help you fill this out. I know there are at least a couple of the service providers under the CETS contracts that do this automatically. And in a couple of cases, from what I understand, they actually send this to you as a part of their mini bid response, which is great because that will allow you to just simply upload this and then have those details added to the line items automatically for you, which is a really, really nice way to do things, particularly if you have a rather large collection of items that you are purchasing. We're going to use this just looking at doing it by hand. No big deal. We're really talking about, in this case, we're talking about wireless data distribution. I mentioned access points in the previous on the previous screen. So we would select that. Notice that then it becomes an iterative process where, depending upon what you select, you then have additional options. Here's where you select access points. It does ask about installation. Is installation included in the price? Installation, as I understand it, for CETS contracts is usually listed separately. So you would be saying no here, and then to have the installation cost covered, you would have to create a separate line item to request installation. Now, if you are going to do that, just to point out, you'll notice here and you look and you see, well, there's nothing here that says anything about installation. It's actually hidden under miscellaneous. If that's your selection, you'll notice then that you can do costs associated with installation, training, and taxes and fees under the miscellaneous category. I'm going to go back to wireless data distribution as a part of our example. Access points. You'll select the make. That's your company that makes that particular item. It's the OEM, and then the model ABC123, whatever that model number is. It's probably not going to be a non-purchase agreement, probably not a lease. And then we have our recurring cost, but this is not recurring costs. So here we're going to be entering zeros, much like we did previously on the other side. We'll do it on this side. And notice that it does ask you for units. You do actually have to select something from the drop down. Otherwise, when you go and click Save and Continue, it's going to bark at you and say, you didn't fill this in. Well, it's irrelevant. Why should I have to? Well, because they said so. So we might have a $500 cost per unit. If those units are not going to be serving ineligible users or locations, you can say 0 here. You may have to take an order of a handful. Let's say that we're purchasing 50 access points for a refresh, but 5 of those are going to be in places that will serve pre-K. So you'll have to do a cost allocation for those 5, but not the other 45. So here you would say 0. Your quantity would be 45, and then it calculates automatically for you. And then for the others, you would create a separate line item that would be just for the 5 that would include a cost allocation. So using that example again, the 10%, just enter the amount that's equal to 10%, and then that gets deducted from the 5 units that are a part of this grouping. We'll save and continue. We'll select the school that is receiving, or schools that are receiving these services. We click Add. They are the one we want. Yes, we're sure that that's the one we want, and we save and continue. And that's how you build out that those line items for those services as well. As I save and continue, we move on. We are now ready to, well, let me stop and ask. Any questions about Category 2 and adding line items and creating FRNs for Category 2? Okay, I will take that as a no. Let's move on to reviewing and certifying the Form 471. Next few steps, blah, 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 final validations, create the PAF. So once it's done, yes, I want to proceed. Why did you even put that there? Okay, so when you get here, note that it doesn't show anything. You do have to click your refresh button every so often. Again, it's probably one of those things where 10, 15, 20 seconds is all you'll need. Do take the time, please, to download the draft. Make sure that it reflects accurately what it is that you are seeking on this Form 471, and then you are ready to check off the checkbox. Now, there are 2 ways that you can go about certification. One is that you can send it to someone else within your district in order for them to sign off. So if you have a CFO or your superintendent or somebody else who's responsible for signing off on these kinds of documents, you can send it to certification for them. It will then show up in their task list as a task, and it would show up right at the top. They would need to click on that, and it will bring them to this page. If they are a Epic user, it will happen. Obviously, if they're not an Epic user, they will need to be added as an Epic user. The other thing that needs to be done with respect to them is to make sure that they have full rights associated with Forms 471 so that they can actually do the certification process. I think that's pretty rare, but it's an option there if that's needed. I think most of you are probably going to be continuing to certify yourselves. On the certification page itself, you have a series of checkboxes, all of which must be checked. I do encourage you to read what it is that you are certifying and acknowledging. But so you understand that the various rules that you're complying, that's what really what you're speaking to, is that you understand the rules and that you have complied with them. And then there is this total funding summary chart here. The first three items are entered based upon what you've put into the Form 471. And then this last item here asks for the total budgeted amount allocated to resources not eligible for E-rate support. Basically, my suggestion here is just enter your district technology budget. If you don't know what that's going to be for next year, you could use your TAR from your most recent TAR report. That would be fine. You are allowed to use an estimate here. So, you don't have to be absolutely precise in terms of this. If you have a projected budget, your board is working on a budget for next year, but they haven't approved it yet, you can use that projected budget as well. It's whatever you have available to you. That is, again, it's going to need to be in some way, shape, or form relatively pertinent to you, but it does not have to be 100% accurate. So I'm just going to put in a number here. What it comes down to is that USAC needs to make sure that you have the ability to purchase things that will go connecting to the WAN services and the internal connections that they are supplying for you or helping you pay for. Last but not least, these last two drop downs are asking about whether or not service providers have helped you actually paid for your non-discounted portion. That is a huge no-no. And if you were to say yes here, you might as well just print it out, crumple it up, and throw it in the round file, because you might as well have wasted your time, because you're not going to get funded. The second question asks about whether they have helped you find those funds. Best if they are offering to help you find those funds, it's probably best for you to just say thank you for offering to help, but we're going to do that on our own. You want to steer clear of any kind of appearance of impropriety or them helping you. There are some horror stories that I won't go into that have resulted in folks losing rather large purchases as a result and gotten them in trouble. All right, so we got them all clicked off. We've entered no's. We've entered our budget. We are finished with the items on this certified page. We are ready to hold our breath and click the button. Oh, wait a minute. One last thing. Little reminder, civil liabilities, criminal prosecution scare you. It's okay. We're all good, upstanding citizens here in the Commonwealth, and so we know that we've done this accurately, we've done it correctly. We can breathe easy and sleep well, knowing that we have done the right thing, and we'll click yes, and boom, we are now certified. I recommend you PDF this page, just so that you have something that shows you what the number is, just in case. Every once in a while, we hear, every other year or so, we'll hear of tragic story of a 471 just disappearing. It does happen. It's rare. So rest assured, it's rare. Sure, Randy, thanks for joining us. It is, as I say, it's rare, but it does happen. I do also recommend you access your certified PDF. From this page, you'll have to scroll down. Notice that it didn't show up right away. Here, you can actually use the refresh page. And it should show up this time. Yep, there it is. Okay. And then go ahead and click on that and download a copy of the Form 471 as you submitted it. Make sure that you maintain that for your documentation. So that is the process for finalizing and certifying, submitting your Form 471. I do want to mention a couple of things with respect to mini bids and bid evaluation and some documentation. I will take about 5 minutes, and then we will wrap up with a few questions if you have any. But with respect to the mini bids, I just want to give you a couple reminders that you need to make sure that you are reaching out to all of the KETS vendors for a quote, both the contract holders and the resellers. When you are sending out a request for bids from them, do not ask for a specific product by make and model, except when you are using it as an example of the functionality that's required. In a case where you might use a reference to a make and model, always use the terms or equivalent. So Bob's Networking WAP, model ABC123, or equivalent. If you do not use or equivalent, that will be considered a violation of the competitive bidding process, and ultimately somebody sooner or later will figure out that should have been denied if it wasn't initially, but it will result in loss of potential funding for you. Excuse me. Remember that there is no Form 470, there is no 28-day waiting period required. There's no Form 470 associated with a mini bid. But I do recommend that you give at least 10 business days for your vendors to respond, and be very clear. Don't just say 10 days, but actually set a specific deadline. Give a day, a date, and a time, and then also make sure that you outline how it is that they're supposed to return those quotes to you in the process of their responding. I'm going to stop sharing there. And then once you get all of your responses, you're going to evaluate those as if you had filed your own Form 470. There's no difference between a mini bid evaluation and a Form 470 bid evaluation. So you're going to start by setting up a bid evaluation matrix, where you list off the criteria that you're evaluating. Remember that price must be the most heavily weighted criteria, but it is not the only criteria that you can use. There are other possible criteria that you can use, and this is not an exhaustive list, but you can look at completeness of the response, the compatibility of the products or services that they're proposing with your existing infrastructure. You can look at prior experience, past performance, the price of non-E-rate eligible items, the ability of that provider to serve the entire district. Any of those are possible criteria. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, but remember that when you assign a potential number of points to each of those criteria, remember that price must have the highest score possible on your bid matrix. And then you go through the process of scoring your bid. So you'd write the service provider name on one of the axes and give them a number for each of to represent the points that they earned for each of your criteria. Add it all up, and to the winner goes the spoils. The largest number of points is your winning bid. If you did not receive any bids, if you didn't receive any quotes or bids either on your 470 or your mini bid, make sure that you memorialize that fact in an email to yourself. I would also just recommend adding like your CFO or somebody else within your department or the superintendent, just to let them know, hey, on this date we closed the period to receive bids closed, and we didn't receive any, and our next steps will be, and by the way, you are allowed to then reach out directly to a specific vendor to request a bid. If you do that, make sure that when you receive that bid from them, go ahead and score it anyway. This is the way that you will use to demonstrate that the bid that you received from the vendor that you reached out to is in fact cost effective. So if USAC had any questions as to whether that was a cost-effective selection, you can say, well, not only was it that we had to go out and get it, because you'll have documentation that shows that you didn't receive any bids, but we still took the bid that we got and we ran it through our bid evaluation matrix to make sure that it was cost-effective. That's the kind of steps that they're going to be looking for under those circumstances. And you'll note that as we've gone through this, here and there, we've been talking about creating various documentation, lists, quotes, mini bids, bid evaluation documentation, the bids you actually receive, any communications with bidders that you might have received, your discount data. There's documentation and everything. And when I say everything, I mean Woody and his little head in Toy Story at the end, turning around and keeping everything. All of that must be kept, and it must be kept for 10 years after the last date to receive services under that FRN, which means that anything associated with this, contracts, et cetera, all of that, the extension agreements, all of those, 10 years after the last date to receive services. Now, the last date to receive services for this funding year, the upcoming funding year will be for category 1 would be June 30th of 2026. So you add 10 years to that, and now we're off to the 2030s, the mid 2030s we're already talking about. So make sure that if you have paper documents, you can scan them and keep them electronically. You don't have to fill up closets full of E-rate documentation, but you do need to make sure that you hold on to those as prescribed for those 10 years. One other thing that I'll talk about very briefly with respect to documentation is SIPA compliance. Do not forget about your SIPA compliance and the requirements associated therewith. SIPA requires that your district has an AUP, it has a content filter, and that you have held a public hearing to allow the folks that live in the district to come into a formal meeting and given their opinion, to express their opinion on internet safety and how it is being implemented within the district. So what does that mean in terms of documentation? Well, what it means is there's going to be a handful of things you need. First of all, you need to make sure that you have something that announced that a public hearing was going to happen. So it might be the board agenda that has to go out ahead of the board meeting for a certain number of days, under sunshine laws and whatnot. It could be something like that. It could be an announcement in the local newspaper. It could be that it was posted on your website. Just make sure that you print out, that you have a printout of the website to show that on the particular date that you printed it out, which should be ahead of the public hearing date, that you did in fact make the public announcement that the public hearing was going to take place. The next one is going to be, well, obviously you're going to have to hold that hearing, and you'll need to have evidence that the hearing was held. So again, if we're talking about a board action or a board meeting, you would want to have the minutes of the meeting reflect that there was an opportunity granted to the public to speak on internet safety. Doesn't mean that anybody actually has to get up and talk about it. It just means that you have to have presented the opportunity to the public to have that occur. You do need to have a copy of your AUP, which addresses internet safety, and I know all of you have an AUP. That's required by Kentucky law as well, so that should not be too difficult for you to have a copy of available if you were ever asked for it. And then you need to have evidence that internet safety is taught in your district. This might mean that you need to have a conversation with somebody who works with curriculum a little bit more, or maybe you already do and you already have that information available. If you do, that's great. But you do need to have something to show that internet safety is a subject that is addressed during instruction at some point during the school year. And then last but certainly not least, you do need to have evidence that you have a content filter in place. What I recommend you do and what USAC will accept as SIPA compliance documentation is a log file. Once a year, you need to go to your content filter dashboard and pull up a log file of the sites that were blocked for a particular day. It doesn't have to be a series of days. It can just be a single day within that funding year. Print it out, pop it in your your E-rate binder or your folder or wherever you keep that, you keep your documentation. That needs to happen on an annual basis. So I would encourage you, as you finish up this meeting, if you don't have a copy of one of those for the 2024 funding year that we're in right now, go ahead and print one out. And go ahead and store that in your documentation so that you can sort of check that off the list. I have thrown a lot at you all, and I know that for many of you that's going to be a review, but for perhaps a handful of you, this was a lot like experiencing taking a drink from a fire hose rather than a drinking fountain. So that having been said, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any now. If you don't have any questions at the moment, please feel free to reach out to myself, Caprice, Courtney. We're really here to provide you with the assistance that you need in order to be successful in this. So any questions at this point?
I do want to say thank you to you and Scott and you and Caprice. For everyone on the call, I think everyone knows that if you get to a point, be sure to reach out to them. They are quick to answer, quick to respond, so knowledgeable. So while you are right now, if you have not put a 470 out, do that now. But as you get to that 471 process, and both of those, make sure you reach out to anyone, but especially Scott and Caprice. So thank you all for the training, and thanks for everything you do to support our region and state. We really, really appreciate you all.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Same to you, Courtney.
Yeah. I've said all along that helping folks be successful is what I really enjoy the most. It's not filing the forms. All righty. Caprice, if you can just shut off the recording.